I I do want to go to audience questions. I'm a bit confused, and you'll forgive me for asking what may be a couple of naive questions, but we're debating the resolution, religion has been a positive force in culture. Some of what's been said has completely confused me. Let me see if I can ask either of you a question to get to understand what you're saying. Mr. Hitchens, first to you, when you talked about your mother-in-law, that was an anecdote that I could really relate to. I understand your mother-in-law, because whilst I'm confused or might have my issues with religion, I do understand her question, which is, look at this architecture that you're looking at. This was created, as you say, from people who believe in God. And
Yes.
then your response was, yes, but it was also created by the monarchy and the feudal system and all kinds of systems and organizations and institutions that we can find heinous things about or that you disagree with. You also said at another point that it may be true that religion has created great music or literature or paintings, you said. So I just want to get this straight. So are you saying, on balance, because there is enough negative that you see in religion, we should not acknowledge the positive and the beautiful building that your mother-in-law pointed out?
Well, no, I rather hope to leave the question open to make it part of the warp and woof of our discussion. I said, would you? I did it, as Professor Brummett might agree, rhetorically. Knowing what we know about the building of St. Peter's by the sale of indulgences, would it be sensible to ask, could you have had one without the other? Can the two be disallocated and considered separately, or are they inseparable? It's an important question, because if religion is going to take credit for these things, then it has to take responsibility for the other ones too. And I haven't noticed a very marked tendency to do that on their part. One could add, for example, I mentioned that we don't know what the motive of many people was who did painting and music, because all we know is they would have been very afraid of not being thought faithful, and with good reason. For example, Giuseppe Verdi was a non-believer. In his case, we happen to know about a great composer. Didn't believe in God. Didn't prevent him from writing an absolutely wonderful requiem. So it's a question of to what extent these two things, and related ones too, are contingent upon one another. I don't have a settled view of that. That's why I ended on the Parthenon, saying I think that the cultural task is to transcend by argument, by cultural philosophical reflection, the legacy of religion, to say that we can have the Parthenon without the belief in Pallas Athena, without the cult of Eleusis, without the probability that some of the friezes on the Parthenon actually display a human sacrifice or the preparation for one. Without Athenian imperialism, we can discard that and keep what is of lasting and enduring value. That, for me, at any rate, is the great cultural undertaking of our time.
But that the flip side may also be true, that we can have all of those things, and that they did come from faith. If you say we don't know, and it may be true that none of this did emerge out of religion, then the opposite is true as well, is it not? We don't know.
Professor Brummett, in responding to me, said, yes, okay, there were some barbarous warlords and monarchs and so forth, but they adopted Christianity opportunistically. Again, I think that's so true as to be almost obvious. We don't know about the Christian message because of what happened during the execution of a charismatic rabbi under the government of Pontius Pilate. We would never have heard about it if it wasn't for a later emperor of that empire, the Emperor Justinian, and later the Emperor Constantine, adopting it as official dogma of the Roman Empire. That's how it comes to us. And those, of course, were opportunistic conversions. It was a Protestant king, King Henry, who agreed to convert to Catholicism to gain the throne and control of Paris, and his remark that Paris is worth a mass stays with us, I think, for an excellent reason. It just goes to underline and emphasize what I said before. This is all man-made. It all proceeds from unresolved contradictions in the material world. The dialectic, as you might say.
Okay. Professor Brummett, let me ask you now a question based on your presentation. Once again, back to the resolution, religion has been a positive force in culture. So you've talked at great length about extremism. And your argument seems to, and you talked about the three strands: dogmatic fundamentalism, apocalyptic belief, and a tendency towards perfection, you said. And then you talked about some solutions and antidotes and what's the other way to think as a way. And your argument seems to be extremism is not limited to religion, but I don't understand where that fits in terms of the question at hand. Has religion been a positive force in culture?
Well, the reason why I didn't take that up with a straight yes or no is because I think the answer is it depends, and I think it depends for the reasons that I tried to cover. I think it's complicated. Number of people in the days preceding this talked to me about the debate, and I kept saying, I'm not sure it's going to be a debate. I think it's going to be a dialogue. I think it's going to be a conversation, which I'm very glad to see has turned out to be that way, despite some disagreement. So my answer would be that it depends. And I think it's whether religion takes on an extremist form or not. Let me also just add, though, the point that I made, I think, in my last response, which is that when we talk about culture in the sense that the resolution puts it, I think we need to think about not just high art, not just high culture, but what effect has religion, whether extremist or not extremist, had on people's everyday culture, on popular culture, and how people live their everyday lives in that way.
I was only picking up on the definition of culture based on Mr. Hitchens' anecdote, but if I modify the question slightly, then will you be able to answer it? If I say, can religion be a positive force in culture, what would your answer be?
I would say it depends on what you mean by... I'm an academic. I'm paid to do this kind of thing. It depends on what you mean by religion. Mr. Hitchens is entirely correct to say that the religious systems that we're talking about are human-made. Absolutely they are. Which says nothing about whether they are extremist or not extremist systems. So I think it's a very complicated question. I think it's a very knotty question. I'm not sure there's a clear answer. I think it depends on the form that religion takes. I think that there are forms of religion that have produced culture that is not necessarily extremist because those forms of religion are not necessarily extremist. I don't think religion has to be extremist, although, as I said, I think Mr. Hitchens is definitely correct to warn us about the perils here, because I think religion has the temptation to skew extremist for a number of reasons. So we need to be on our guard for that. But I don't think it has to be. So I'm going to weasel out of the question yet again by saying I think it depends.
I think, actually, we got an answer in between the disclaimers. I think there was something in there. I want to just, if you want to, I want to open this up to the audience at this point. So just put your hand up and I will come to you. In the meantime, Mr. Hitchens, I just want to ask you if you have any rebuttal to what you just heard, that exchange and what Professor Brummett just said.
Well, I don't want to be the one who stands between the audience and its question time. I don't know how well off we are for time.
We're doing pretty well.
I think I would want to say one thing, though, if I might, which is this, because the third leg of Professor Brummett's proposition, that of perfection, we haven't addressed yet. It's incredibly important and very interesting to me. Oscar Wilde wrote once that a map of the world that didn't include utopia wouldn't be worth glancing at. I used to think that was a wonderful statement, and I'm now very unsure of it. Indeed, I think it may be seductive, and certainly the idea of just doing without the idea of utopia when constructing your map makes you feel you've lost something, possibly something rather beautiful. Nonetheless, maybe a seduction into something very deadly. The idea of teleology of the possibility of a radiant and almost ultimate future is a very hard one to drop. I spent a lot of my life as a member of a Marxist organization. I learned a lot from that. A lot of it was well worth knowing. But as I gradually transcended and began to discard at least some of it, trying to salvage what I could and make use of it, I think the giving up of the teleological was almost the hardest. It's a very hard thing for people to do. To say perhaps we're not going to arrive at a point where I would know enough to tell you with real authority what you should do. In other words, that I would become the subject rather than the object of that sentence about the sure and the certain. I'm pretty sure, pretty certain, in fact, that I won't ever know enough to be in that position, and no one should trust me if I ever looked as if I was going to. The beauty and the interest, the consuming beauty and interest of the struggle to master science and philosophy and physics and the extraordinary new and wonderful discoveries that we're making. Just the preoccupation with those enormous questions is more than enough for a lifetime, much more than enough. And it's, I think, a shame that for many people it takes almost a lifetime to find that out.
Okay.